Ever met someone who swears by a childhood memory only for their parents to say, "That never happened"? Maybe it was that time you won a race in kindergarten, but the real story is you tripped over your own shoelaces and cried until they gave you a participation sticker. Turns out, your entire existence might work the same way. Not just memories, but your entire reality, your beliefs, your identity, even what you think is true, could be nothing more than a convincing hallucination your brain carefully crafted over time. Here's where it gets eerie. Neuroscientists have found that your brain doesn't actually see the world, it predicts it. Every moment, it guesses what's in front of you, fills in the gaps, and then presents you with a best guess reality. It's like autocorrect, but for your entire perception of life. And just like autocorrect, it gets things hilariously, sometimes dangerously wrong. So now the real question is, if everything you experience is just your brain's best guess, what happens when you start questioning the guess? Let's get into it. Because once you do, reality might never look the same again. Your mind is like a storyteller that never actually witnessed the story. It just fills in the gaps and convinces you it saw everything. You ever meet someone who confidently explains a movie plot, but you've seen the movie and half of what they're saying never even happened? That's your brain, every single day. It's not recording life like a camera. It's fabricating it. And worse, it does this so convincingly that you don't even question it. Take time, for example. We think of time as this steady, predictable thing, ticking away second by second. But if that were true, why does time feel different depending on what you're doing? An hour in traffic feels like eternity. An hour of doing something fun, gone in an instant. But here's the twist. Time itself isn't changing. You are. Or at least your mind's perception of time is. It stretches and compresses based on what you're paying attention to. That's why life feels so slow when you're a kid, but speeds up the older you get. The more familiar something is, the less attention your brain gives it. That's not just an interesting fact. It's a massive clue about the way reality works. If your brain can manipulate something as fundamental as time itself, what else is it bending without you realizing it? Let's talk about déjà vu. That weird glitch where you feel like you've already lived a moment before. Science tries to explain it as a misfire in your memory, like your brain is trying to recall something and accidentally tags the present moment as the past. But why does it feel so real? Some say déjà vu is proof that time isn't linear at all, that maybe you're not remembering something from the past, but actually picking up on something from a parallel version of you who already lived it. Wild idea? Maybe. But so is the fact that scientists have already proven that your brain sees the future before you're aware of it. Seriously. There have been experiments where people are shown random images, and before they even see them, their brain waves start reacting as if they already knew what was coming, almost like their mind was peeking ahead into time before their conscious brain caught up. So if your perception of time is unreliable, and your brain might already know the future before you do, what does that say about free will? Are you making choices, or are you just playing out a script that was already written? And if so, who wrote it? So let's take this a step further. If your brain can predict things before they happen, if time itself isn't as steady as we think, then what exactly is shaping your reality? Because here's something you might not have realized. Your senses are filtering out more than they're letting in. You experience reality through sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell, right? But what about the millions of things your senses aren't picking up? You can't see infrared light, but snakes can. You can't hear ultrasound, but bats navigate entire worlds with it. You don't feel Wi-Fi signals, but they're passing through your body right now. So what if the world around you is filled with unseen layers of reality, but your brain is filtering it all out because it decided, not important. And here's where it gets weirder. Your perception itself is built on assumptions. Your brain isn't actually seeing reality. It's predicting it. This isn't some philosophical idea. It's proven neuroscience. Your brain doesn't just process the present moment. It constantly predicts the next one based on past experiences. Ever walk through your house in the dark, navigating purely by memory. Your brain is painting the walls and furniture in your mind before you even see them. But if you ever stub your toe on something that wasn't supposed to be there, reality snaps back in. For a second, you're like, wait, how did that get there? But in reality, your mind just constructed a version of the room that didn't match what was actually there. So if your brain is constantly predicting what's around you, instead of truly seeing it, how much of your reality is actually real? Because here's the thing, this doesn't just apply to your surroundings. It applies to people, to experiences, to your identity. Your brain has created a predictive model of who you think you are. It's not just remembering your past, it's reinforcing it. Every time you recall a memory, you're not replaying a perfect recording, you're rewriting it. That's why two people can experience the same event, but remember it completely differently. It's not that one is lying, it's that their brain reshaped the memory based on emotions, expectations, and personal biases. So if your memories aren't reliable, if your senses are filtering out most of reality, if time itself is slipping and bending, then we're left with one huge question. What's really shaping your experience? And if reality is just a projection of your mind's predictions, can you rewrite it? Alright, so if reality isn't exactly what it seems, and your brain is predicting more than it's perceiving, let's take this idea to the next level, because this doesn't just apply to what you see, it applies to your entire life. Let me tell you a quick story. In the 1980s, a man named Mike May had his vision restored after being blind for 43 years. Science had caught up, and a new surgery gave him the ability to see again. But something strange happened. Even though his eyes were working, his brain couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. He could detect colors, shapes, and movement, but when looking at a human face, he couldn't recognize anyone, not even his own wife. Why? Because for 43 years, his brain had never built a vision-based reality. His world had always been structured through touch, sound, and experience. So even though his eyes were now receiving information, his brain didn't know how to process it. Think about what that means. If you were suddenly given an extra sense, maybe the ability to perceive ultraviolet light or hear electromagnetic frequencies, would your brain even know what to do with it? Or would it just ignore it completely, filtering it out like it never existed? Now let's take that even further. If your brain is filtering reality, if it's constantly reshaping what you experience based on past expectations, then what other parts of your life are being controlled by invisible filters you don't even know exist? Have you ever noticed how certain people seem to live in different worlds? Some people are constantly stuck in patterns, seeing the world as hostile, unfair, or against them, while others in the same situations find opportunities, growth, and meaning. It's not because one group is lucky or the other is cursed. It's because their brains are shaping their reality based on past expectations. A person who's been betrayed in the past, their mind expects betrayal and seeks proof of it everywhere, even when none exists. A person who believes opportunities are everywhere, their mind is actively scanning for them and finding what others miss. Your brain is a filter. Your brain is a filter, and the settings weren't chosen by you. They were programmed by past experiences, childhood beliefs, societal expectations, and the subconscious patterns you never even questioned. So here's the real question. If reality is being shaped by the filters in your mind, can you change the filters? Can you reprogram what you see by changing what you expect to find? So if your brain is filtering reality, predicting what you see, and shaping your experiences before you're even aware of them, then what happens when you take control of the filter? Because here's the thing, most people never do. They go through life assuming that what they experience is just how things are, that their limits are real, that their emotions are facts, that their past defines their future. But the people who break out of this, the ones who seem to move through life as if reality itself bends in their favor, they're not special. They're not different. They just figured out the secret. They rewrote the script their brain was following. Let me tell you about a guy named Wim Hof, the Iceman. Scientists studied him because he could do things that should be impossible. He could sit in ice water for hours without his body temperature dropping. He could control his immune system at will. At first, researchers thought he was just some genetic anomaly, a freak of nature, but then they did something that changed everything. They trained other people in his techniques, and they started doing the same things. What does that tell us? That your body, your mind, your limits, they're not set in stone. They're programmed, and what's programmed can be rewritten. But most people don't rewrite anything. They don't challenge their emotions. They assume, this is just how I feel. They don't question their reactions. They assume, this is just who I am. They don't test their abilities. They assume, this is all I'm capable of. And so they stay inside the same mental patterns, seeing the same version of reality over and over again, not because it's real, but because it's what their brain expects to see. But here's the part no one tells you. The second you start changing what you expect, reality shifts to match it. This isn't positive thinking. This isn't some self-help gimmick. This is how your brain works. When you change what you expect to find, your mind starts scanning for proof of it. That's why, when someone starts believing in their ability to succeed, they suddenly start noticing more opportunities, not because they weren't there before, but because their brain was filtering them out. That's why, when someone stops expecting failure, they stop unconsciously sabotaging themselves. That's why when someone starts seeing themselves as capable, strong, and in control, they start acting in ways that reinforce it until reality itself starts reflecting it back. And this is where things get dangerous. Because once you realize this, once you really, truly grasp it, you can't just go back to normal life. Because now you know, your mind isn't just experiencing reality, it's creating it. And the biggest illusion? Thinking you ever had to follow the script you were given. At this point, the question isn't just whether your mind is shaping your reality, it's how deep the illusion goes. Because this isn't just about your thoughts. This isn't just about your perception. This is about how everything you assume to be real is only real because you haven't questioned it. Take emotions, for example. Most people believe that emotions just happen to them, that they're spontaneous, uncontrollable forces, happiness, sadness, fear, excitement, all of it just showing up without warning. But what if that's not the case at all? What if emotions are just pre-programmed responses based on past experiences? Ever notice how some people handle stress like it's nothing, while others crumble over the smallest problem? It's not because one person is stronger than the other. It's because they've trained their mind to respond a certain way. A firefighter running into a burning building isn't fearless. They just rewrote their emotional script. What once triggered panic has been conditioned into calm action. A public speaker who once froze at the thought of an audience doesn't magically overcome their fear. They train their brain to rewire its reaction. Now apply this to your own life. How many times have you reacted to something not because it was actually a threat, but because your mind decided it was? You assume rejection before it happens, so you pull back first. You expect failure, so you never try. You react with anger, sadness, or fear because somewhere in the past, that reaction got locked into place. But what happens when you start rewriting the script? What happens when you stop believing that your first emotional response is the truth? Reality shifts, because now you're not just reacting, you're choosing. And here's where things get crazy. If emotions can be reprogrammed, if perception can be rewritten, then what else? What about the way you experience time? Ever noticed how a day doing something new feels longer than a day spent in the same routine? That's because time, as you experience it, isn't fixed. It stretches and compresses based on how much your mind is engaged. That's why people say life speeds up as they get older. It's not that time is moving faster. It's that their brains stop noticing new things. The less you challenge reality, the more predictable it becomes. And that's the real reason most people feel stuck. Not because life is against them, not because they're unlucky, but because they stopped noticing the dream. Because when you're awake inside a dream, you start testing the edges, you start bending the rules, you start playing with reality instead of just reacting to it. And when that happens, you don't just live differently, you see the world for what it really is. So what happens now? You've seen the cracks in the illusion. You've realized that your mind isn't just experiencing reality, it's creating it. You've seen how your emotions, your beliefs, even your perception of time itself are all shaped by invisible patterns that were never truly yours to begin with. And here's the part most people don't want to admit. Even after seeing the illusion, most people go back to sleep. They see the patterns, they feel the shift, and then they wake up the next morning and slip right back into their old way of thinking, not because they want to, but because the mind always defaults to what's familiar. And that's the final trick. Reality doesn't hold you in place. Your own mind does. The beliefs you refuse to question, the emotions you accept as truth, the patterns you mistake for fate. That's what keeps the dream running. That's what makes the script feel so real. So the real question isn't, is reality an illusion? The real question is, what are you going to do with that information? Because most people will hear this, agree with it, maybe even feel a shift, and then go right back to their normal routine. But for the few who actually act on it, who actually stop, pay attention, and rewrite the way they move through life, they don't just see reality differently. They step outside of it entirely. So now it's up to you. You can let this just be an interesting thought, something you hear, and then forget by tomorrow. Or you can test the edges of your own reality. Start questioning the reactions you normally accept. Start noticing the patterns you've never paid attention to before.